Welcome to I Got Ish to Say podcast with your host, Alfonso McClendon. This is going to be the most challenging, controversial conversation that you ever have. My literary hero, James Baldwin, once said, not everything faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed unless you face it. This conversation will be about talking about the systems, not the people that control us. With this conversation, it's going to be raw, uncut, unfiltered, straight, no chaser. We're going to talk about things that we talk about in private, but yet we're going to have this public conversation. We're here to bring all the ish to the table. But with the ish, we hope to bring change, challenge, and impartation, which impact a community. So welcome again to I Got Ish to Say. Enjoy this journey with us as we have these conversations. I often say there are Michael Jordans in every community, but they never have an opportunity to shine because they don't have a platform. We're not here to seek out the famous. We're here to seek the people who have a voice, who have something to say that's overlooked because they don't have money. They're overlooked because they don't have a platform, overlooked because they don't have the prestige. But we're going to have raw, uncensored conversation with everyday folk. But these folks got a conversation that will impact a community, change a community, challenge community, and we can uplift the community because we're going to deal with the systems that destroy our community. I Got Ish to Say is coming straight for you. So like, subscribe, follow us. Enjoy the journey because we got ish to say. Welcome to I Got Ish to Say, one of the most challenging, controversial conversations you will ever have. Today, I'm honored to have one of my special friends of over 30 years come and sit down and have a conversation with me about the heights, the lows, the downfalls, and now the rebuild of his life. His name is MAYS. This story is going to be compelling. It's going to be impactful, but most of all, it's going to be inspiring. So welcome, Andre, to I Got Ish to Say. Man, this conversation been over 2 years.
Right.
And I thank you for encouraging me because every now and then I look at my inbox, hey, man, what's going on in the podcast? What's going on in the podcast? And so we're here today.
Right.
But we're going to talk about a compelling story, your story.
Most definitely.
And I believe your story is going to help the youth of today and tomorrow. And it's going to transform some lives. I remember in 11th grade, Piketon High School, we were lab mates in Dr. T. Lee class and things. We used to cut up all the time, man.
Most definitely.
But this particular day, man, while we was picking at a friend of ours about a girl that everybody in the class liked, I asked you a question. And I want to know if you remember that question. You said to me after I asked you, I said, Andre, what you going to be in life? And you said, I'm going to be one of the biggest drug dealers in Jacksonville. That came true. Do you remember that?
Well, basically, I can't say that I exactly remember, but it sounded like something in my youth that I would say.
Right.
Thinking it was cool and, so forth. So
What made you want to be a drug dealer?
thinking back, I was going to Mary McLeod Bethune, 6th grade center, on the north side in the Moncrief area. My mother used to go with a guy named Jack. Matter of fact, name was Jack Johnson. So, he would pick me up from school, take me to school using my mother's car. And I remember one day he had picked me up. My mother had a burgundy Regal. And we stopped, maybe it was like on 33rd Street, and there was a guy, Jack flagged the guy down. He was in a goldish Cadillac Chevelle, young guy, and I never forget his name to this day. That's been over 45 years ago. Jack called him Little Larry. So, I'm sitting on the passenger side, 6th grade student. But, I'm inquisitive. And Jack asked him, did he have some weed? And he said, yeah, follow me. And we went to I remember it was a grayish duplex. Little Larry pulled up in the Chevelle. Jack got out, but I stayed in the car. They walked inside. I remember it was an older black lady. And I guess, now I'm thinking back that, she must be working for Lil Larry. So, and when Lil Larry came out, he had a bag full of money. I never forget, a brown bag full of money. Mm-hmm. So, Jack get back in. I see he got the weed in his hand. And I'm going to tell you how I first knew about weed. So, and this started happening on a constant basis. Me and Jack would go to that same apartment. I see Lil Larry with these bags of money. So, I'm listening. I said, oh, okay, well, he's selling weed. And Jack had a nephew called Lily. Every morning when I went to Jack's sister house to get ready, to walk back to Merriman Cloud Bethune, his nephew, he would take me sometime. He would be smoking weed. And that's the first time I actually got introduced with using drugs.
Okay.
When I was in the 6th grade at Merriman Cloud Bethune. And I'm talking about I used to go to 6th grade high as hell. Lit. So seeing little Larry, that's what made me want to be a drug dealer. But I look back on that, I got grandsons.
Right.
And I say, I don't know want my grandsons to experience that, especially at so young.
Right.
6th grade, you going to school every day, high. And it shows you how you can hang around the wrong person or an older person. Like I said, I was in 6th grade.
Right.
I'd be Larry, they called him Lily. He was out of school, but he introduced me to using drugs. And I actually started liking it.
Right.
The way from the 6th grade until on when we was going to high school together,
Right.
I always smoked weed. And then my mother, she never knew.
Never know.
Yeah.
But when we talk about the drug game, how did you get your start?
Well, how I got my start was when we went to high school. You should remember him, Milkman.
Yeah.
Who we call Milkman.
Right.
He was basically already hustling.
Right.
And, seeing him, I remember he had his little Ford Ranger truck.
Yeah.
And I kind of got my start from him.
Okay.
Because in the 10th grade, I worked at Pizza Hut. My first job, Pizza Hut, it was off Plymouth Avenue.
I remember.
And so, I had money saved. And I remember me and Milkman talking. And, he broke it down to me. And then I think the first thing that I ever bought, because, crack was the thing then.
Right.
Maybe like a 1/4 ounce.
Okay.
And from there, I just took off. And I was fortunate enough. That's why now some people in the game, they never get connects.
Right.
But I was fortunate enough in high school, I was able to run across an older guy, and he liked me. And he, the one, really gave me my first opportunity. Until the day, this guy's still living. I won't mention his name.
Right.
But he's probably maybe same age as my mother, probably mid-70s. And my mother hated him because she knew as I started growing in the game, it was because of him. And then, I just branched off, myself. But I'm finna tell you something that you probably never knew. I know you remember Lil Willie Freeman.
Yeah.
Lil Willie Freeman, the first one who took me to Miami, probably when I was like about 16, to buy a brick of cocaine. Yeah.
So when you say break, you're talking about whole key.
Yes. It was because of him.
So at 16 years old, you buy a whole key, and at that time, the street value of a whole key was what, maybe 50, 60,000?
No, sir. Around that time, I'm gonna say, because I never paid that much for a kilo of cocaine. I'm gonna say, that's 35 years ago.
Yeah.
Probably could have been like 15. Yeah.
So at 16, you buy the kilo of cocaine for 15,000.
Right.
But when you break it down, sell it in the street, what was the value of that $15,000 worth of investment?
Shoot, probably about 70. Just to get off it fast.
At 16.
Yes.
16, you bought your first brick.
Right.
Elaborate on that for a little bit, because you saying at 16, you doing something that some grown folks wasn't even doing. But
right.
But at 16,
right,
you go to Miami, buy your first brick,
right,
bring it back because you want to get rid of it quick.
Right.
You done make 70 grand.
Right. And it's cause like the area, like now, the way my mother lived in the Paxton area, I'm actually the first one that put crack in the area. And some guys know because they be like, well, who's the guy Andre MAYS? And recently I was, I would go, I go to my mother's house. She always want me to stop and get her a Diet Coke. So I was in the store around right across by the Coca-Cola plant.
Uh-huh.
When I got in the car, a guy recognized me. He said, "What's up, Dre?" But I kind of vaguely, recognized. He said, "Oh, I'm Bud, brother." I said, "What's up?" And then the other dude said, "Oh, that's Dre, the one who they be talking about, who started that down the street." So it wasn't hard to make money then, because in that area, it was all white. It was all white, customers. So, and selling pikes and to the guys in school, I don't know if you knew, but a lot of guys in school, I actually, I gave them their first chance, to hustle. You know, Maybe I would front them 2, 3 ounces, someone would buy. And one guy to this day, Derek. Do you remember Derek? Red light skinned Derek.
I remember Derek.
Yeah, he had a grandpa. So, I used to, they would buy quarter ounces, half ounces, and ounces. And there was another guy who went to school with us, and he got killed. I never forget his name, Antoine Banks.
I remember Antoine.
So, it was, and they was from what? Is that Washington, Lincoln State?
Yeah.
So, 4, 5 of them, I was giving a little work to them. Then, like I say, I had my first trap right around there by the Coca-Cola plant in the apartments behind the store. And, we was, and we was doing our thing. Back then, crack was at its height.
Right, right.
So, it wasn't nothing to make $5,000 an hour on a Friday night, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. So, it was at its height.
So was it the lure of the fast money? Because you were smart in school, so you wasn't like a dummy in school.
Yeah, I was somewhat smart.
You wasn't a dummy. So what was it? Was it the lure of the money? Was it the fame? Was it the women? What was it that fueling this drug trafficking? Because now you telling me something new, that we sitting in class, you already got trap houses, you already got people working for you while we in high school.
Right.
But you came to high school every day. You was fresh to death. I got to give you that. You was fresh to death. You was very jovial, because that's all we did in Miss T's
Right.
class, rank on each other,
Right.
at laugh. But here it is now, I'm learning that you already had an empire set up while we were still in high school. What was that driving force behind it for you?
Shoot, the money.
The money.
The money. The money. The me.
But you had, your mother was working. She was a good mama. She wasn't like a bad mother. You had good parenting. Come from a good home.
Oh, my mother was an excellent mother, and she made 6 figures.
But see, that's the thing. Most kids who sell drugs at that age, they come from bad homes. Mama is not making it, but that's not your story.
No,
So it was nothing to really say, I need to do this. This is a decision you made for yourself.
Right, most definitely. The money. The money. The nice things. As you remember in high school, I already had a car where eventually I got the car. That's when the truths involved.
Yeah.
Pearl paint job, the rags. So, I had the colors. It was what money could do. And, 16, 17 years old, already having $100,000, $200,000 saved. It was about the money.
But was it ever time you felt that your family was in jeopardy because of what you did in the street?
No, because I'm just say no. Because I wasn't a slimy dude. Basically no. But looking back, as I started growing in the game, going down to Miami, meeting people. And one time on Facebook, I was telling my story, because numerous people came to me and wanted me to tell my story.
Right.
Some on my shelf. I don't know you. I'm not telling you nothing about me.
Right.
But I met some Spanish dudes. The one time when I was on Facebook talking, I told it to where they was like, okay. I met them. I was at Luke's. In Miami.
Okay.
That's when I had the orange Benz, and the Spanish guys, they was parked next to me. And they're like, we never seen this car before. You from? I say, I'm from Jacksonville. They say, for real? So, we started talking, and, they was like, well, maybe, we need to, really hook up. I never forget one of them names. His name was Alex. So, we became friends. So, and they like, before we deal, we got to know everything about you.
Right.
We don't want to take no losses. We don't deal with no slimy shit. So, and I remember They came to Jacksonville. They bought me a couple of bricks. So they was like, if this continue to go on, we need to know. First they asked, is your mother alive? I said, yes. They say, well, we need to know where she worked. I said, yeah, she worked. They say, well, we need a copy of her driving license. So I look back on all this and see how maybe, the money was good, but the shit that we do for it.
Right.
Yeah, like if something happened, somebody gonna have to pay.
Right.
So, and I actually went to my mother's house one day, got her driving license, and I know when she see this or hear this, and made a copy of it. And I gave it to the Spanish dude. And looking back, I think one of them came to our house with me. She was like, who was that? I'm like, oh, that's my friend from school. So, and, I just look back on stuff like that and see that we do put our people, in danger.
Yeah.
But anything could have happened.
Right.
And, Alice was cool, but his brother, I guess, supposed to be in the muscle.
Right.
Or, whatever. But, I look back on all that stuff now and say, damn, was that shit even worth it?
Right. Because they asked for the closest thing to you at that time, your mother.
Right.
So if something would have happened, your mother would have had to pay the price for your mistake.
Right. Right.
At the height of your career, tell me about the height of your career. I remember one day I was at my mother's house and I'm walking down the street. I hear this horn blowing, but I can't really hear the horn over the loud music. And I see this orange Benz coming down the street, flipped up, and you leaning in it, and you like you looking at me like, I did it, Peanut, I did it.
Right.
So at the height of your career, the cars, the jewelry, tell me about that.
I would say, the height of my career, the way, I had a nice chunk of money saved, and I was able to take trips. I was able, I had 2-3 people who I can go to, I could get bricks from. And I just say I was comfortable. But at least I thought I was comfortable. But now looking back on all that, no, I wasn't comfortable.
During that particular time, it's safe to say that you influenced a lot of young people to follow your path.
Oh, most definitely. And guys will give me my credit. They say that now. That's why, I say sometimes that before guys had their first Chevy, I was already driving Benzes. So, yes. But I also look back on that now, that, as we say, bad influences. See, and like my mother to today still think that she blamed other people for what I was doing, but not knowing her son was the one who was really behind it.
Right.
But in actuality, she knows, and I influence a lot of people. But looking back on that now, that ain't nothing to brag about.
What was there every time you looked in the mirror, maybe with jewelry on or nice clothes, and didn't recognize the man you saw in the mirror?
No, I smiled when I would see that.
that was success for you, right?
Almost definitely.
You would say to
a
yourself,
false sense of success.
Yeah.
Now looking back, being 55 years old, looking back 19, 20 years old, all that, it was cool back then. But looking back on it, no, it was destruction in the making.
So what was, and it's a twofold question, what was your biggest flex when you had all the money, you had the fame, you had the cars? What was your biggest flex? I lived in the Midwest for a couple of years, and in the Midwest, there would be, every year it would be like an annual event.
Right.
And all the dope boys, they would they flex was,
right.
I put a new park in the community for the kids. I put new swings and all this stuff, or I put computers in the computer lab, or they knew they was destroying the community, but yet at the same time, their conscience said, I need to go back and give something to the community, especially the youth of the community, because, I'm selling drugs to their mom, their dad, their aunties and uncles, but with this money, I still want to do something positive. Was it ever a time that you went to the community that you was destroying and said, let me do something to build it up?
I'm going to be honest. No, maybe gave a cookout.
Mm-hmm.
Because in Fly Street, we used to give cookouts all the time.
Right.
And maybe if we knew, one time, this guy, and he's deceased now. He died when I was in federal prison. His name, was Charles. He stayed on your side. Charles that used to cut hair.
Yeah, exactly.
And I remember when his little girl died, right out there in Flagg Street, and they didn't have no way to pay for the funeral. So I'm like, I'll pay for the funeral. And but when it came time for me to pay, his baby mama said, "No, Dre, we don't need the money." I think they got it from somewhere. But so when it came to a situation like that, I didn't mind, helping, but just doing stuff, and I look back on that, it could have been more that I could have did, but you gotta understand I was young too.
Right, right.
I went to federal prison when I was 23.
Okay.
Got sentenced close to 40 years, so I was young, and then I don't shy away that I was dumb.
Okay.
I was extremely dumb, even though I had money. I had the so-called glamorous stuff that's really nothing now, but I was dumb. I was dumb.
So you mentioned that about paying for the funeral. Did you feel a sense of obligation over empathy, meaning that maybe what I'm doing in the community probably caused this death, and so out of guilt you pay for it?
No, I was willing to pay for it because I know they needed it done. And me and the father was cool. Me and the mother, was cool. But no, I didn't, no type of way drugs played a role in the little girl dying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was no shootout and nothing.
No,
like
no.
that. Okay. So let's talk about when the heat is on, when the heat got on you. Was there a time that you ever felt like, it's close to me getting busted, or, the pressure on me, the heat? How do you deal with two things, jealousy, and then when did you feel the heat from law enforcement coming on you?
Well, honestly, I never felt the heat from law enforcement. Never. Now jealousy, in our community, I'm saying, jealousy, that's normal.
So did you have law enforcement on your payroll?
No. But I'm gonna say that, maybe it was officers that would come through the spot. All right now, y'all better get it together. But no.
Okay.
And some people do kind of allege that with me because of other people situation that has something to do with, law enforcement. But no, I didn't.
Okay. So never feeling the heat. So never feeling the heat just mean like you can turn it up. You keep turning up because you don't
Right.
feel that this could ever end. Did you have an exit plan, or you felt like, I can rock like this forever?
Well, yes, I had an exit plan. I wanted to have a certain amount of money, and then I was gonna give it up. But like I said, the heat, no, because I knew basically who I was dealing with, and
So basically you really wasn't a corner boy anyway. You was actually the plug for many other people. You had a plug, but you was actually the plug.
right. Oh yes, I hadn't graduated, from the corner, because like I said, the spot that I had around out by person who Huron, I stopped even going around there. So, and the guys who was still around there, they stayed around there. But no, I had other people who, would come to me, for certain amounts. And so you can say, yes, I had a plug, but I also, was somewhat, the plug also.
Right.